My name's Jim Peck. I'm the pastor here at New Vision United Church of Christ, and we are delighted to be able to host this forum about something that really matters in this community. In my life before ministry, I was a planner and worked 4 years for the governor of Colorado. Part of our portfolio was affordable housing and homelessness. Now, I've been in Chico 10 years, and I kept that a secret for a while. But this is a deep concern of mine personally. My church cares about this issue. And this is a church that believes that when people come together to talk clearly and to listen well, that we can learn and we can actually solve problems if we attend to that. So we are delighted to host this event. Thank you, Scott, for organizing it. A couple of logistical things. There are 2 restrooms back there just off our kitchen. They are both single-use, gender-neutral restrooms. You do not have to prove anything about who you are in order to go to the restroom at New Vision United Church of Christ. Amazing. We have some water and some soft drinks there that you're welcome to. If you need to just get up and wander around, wander around. The cards in your pew, the cards in your seat are for writing notes or questions. And if you write one down, raise it up, and either Mary or I will come and get them and deliver them to Scott, who will be our moderator tonight. Thank you, Scott, for inviting folks, and thank you to our panelists for saying yes. Have a wonderful
discussion. Thank you, Jim, for your generosity. I first met Jim at a State of the City address about 2 months ago, and I was very impressed with his position on a lot of issues, and I came up to him after the meeting and I asked him if he could host a housing affordability forum at his church, and without hesitation he said yes. He set every one of these chairs out here this evening himself before we got here, so thank you very much, Jim.
Before we go on, let me just mention, we love our space here at New Vision Church, but one of the deficiencies of it is that we only have one microphone that I use on Sundays, and it hooks around your ear and comes right here. So panelists, you're going to need to be sure and project, and audience, you need to listen with your best listening. That's it.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you all for taking the time to consider this important issue. My name is Scott Huber. I'll be your moderator for the forum. This year marks my 40th year living in Chico. That's a given that's going to happen. I'm a Chico State graduate. My own experience in housing comes from the 15 years that I spent as a real estate agent. A couple of years of those as the president of the local Realtors Association. I've also rented, bought, and built houses. I've owned, and I currently own, a rental property. And I actually spent a weekend being homeless, but that was just a test. It wasn't a real homeless experience. I came up with the idea for this forum because these discussions and conversations aren't currently happening at the city council meetings where they rightly should.
Hear, hear. Yeah.
And because I personally want to have a deeper understanding of the challenges and potential solutions to providing more housing affordability. And I figured the only way I could get all of these people in one room together was to make it an event. So thank you very much for agreeing to come. And I know that I'm not alone, as evidenced by the great crowd we've got here tonight. Arguably, the rising costs of housing are one of the primary causes of homelessness. Logic suggests that when a person can't afford the cost of any dwelling in their area, unless they have friends or relatives that they can live with nearby, they're going to be living on the streets or in their apartments. That said, this forum is not only about those in danger of going homeless. We'll also discuss the lack of rental affordability for the elderly, moderate income workers, and entry-level home buyers. For that reason, we'll divide up the forum into the following parts. We'll start with an overview of market conditions in each category, rental properties and owned properties. Then we'll spend the largest portion discussing the rental housing market from low and very low income people. We'll then explore home sales, and the factors influencing affordability. And we'll ask a lot of general questions that can be related to either owned or rented properties. For the first 60 to 90 minutes, I'll ask a combination of my own questions and those suggested by others. The second part of the forum will be audience generated. So please use the provided note cards to jot down your questions and hold them up so that Jim or Mary can collect them and get them to me. I'll draw from that pile randomly so all questions have an equal opportunity of being asked. Our guidelines for both panelists and the audience are simple. Please be respectful, avoid personalizing questions or blaming. Be succinct so that we have time to get to as many issues and questions as possible. If you have questions, please write them down and turn them in. The protocol will be, I'll direct some questions at specific panelists. Once a question directed to a specific panelist has been answered by that panelist, then other panelists may answer the same question. In the interest of time, not every panelist has to answer the question. We'll start off now by providing each of our panelists about 1 minute to introduce themselves, their role or title, and describe their relationship to housing issues, and whether they primarily deal with property sales or property rentals. Randall, why don't we start with you?
Well, good evening, and thank you for hosting this very important topic. I'm on the Chico City Council. I'm a master's in public administration, primarily directed at housing and municipal finance. I'm a developer of affordable housing. I built, my younger brother and I built 1197 East 8th Street, which is a 100% affordable housing community here in Chico, subsidized with low-income housing tax credits. I'm a financial planner, and I do some consulting on real estate development for private clients. Since I'm in the city of Chico, I'm on the council, and I don't consult for that work there. And I serve on the Assessment Appeals Board for Butte County, one of the 3 arbiters for evaluation between the assessor's office and the taxpayers. I'm also the president of Shalom Free Clinic, a volunteer with Safe Space, and chair of the Greater Chico Homeless Task Force, and serve on a couple of committees related to housing with the League of California Cities.
I'm Bob Troush. I am one of the founding members of CHAT, Chico Housing Action Team. I have several rentals in this community, and for years I have been renting to people from the streets, and we've had a lot of success at doing that. We started Chico Housing Action Team because there didn't seem to be much action in the community about building affordable homes and or having homeless people being taken off the street. So our initial thing was to start building small affordable housing, truly affordable housing. That didn't happen right away. We needed to change hearts and minds. We're still working on that. So in the interim, we started Safe Space, which I think many people know in the community has been going for 5 years. After Safe Space, we realized we're not housing people. So we started an organization under that umbrella of CHAT of Housing Now. We have 18 houses at this point in the community, all spread out throughout the community. People don't know where those houses are. They're incredibly successful at housing people, anywhere from 1 person to as many as 6 in a home. We're still working on building a village, Simplicity Village, that would be surrounded with services just like our houses are surrounded. And so I'm coming at this not from an expert perspective, but having a mentally ill child and realizing what it's like living on the street, just saying something has to be done. And we as citizens in the community can do it, because so many times agencies aren't doing it. There's more talk than action.
Good.
My name is Ed Mayer. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Authority of the County of Butte, a local public agency where I've served now for 10 years. I served 10 years before that as Executive Director of the Housing Authority of the City of Missoula in Montana. Prior to that, I worked for about 15 years as a developer, developing commercial business park subdivisions and commercial real estate in Anchorage, Alaska. I'm trained as an architect and a planner.
Hi, my name is Bill Brower. I've been a Chico resident for about 38 years now. My number 1 role is as a father. I've got 2 boys, 7 and 9, which at my age is ridiculous.
Speak up.
I've been involved in commercial real estate for about 35 years. We do Industrial development, so if we find a client needs an industrial building, we're the developers of the Hagen Lane Business Park. Over 1,000 jobs out there right now. I also specialized for much of my career in large-scale comprehensive land use planning. So I deal with land planning and the effects, the supply, demand, market characteristics, many of those things that influence ultimately the cost of housing in the community. I don't have any direct expertise in low, very low, and homelessness, although I'm very sensitive to those populations, and I'm interested in doing what we can on the private sector to try and solve some of those community issues.
I'm Richard Hunt. I'm the owner of a company called Peloton Research Partners here in Chico. It's a market research firm and economic development firm. I work in 28 states across the U.S., although I also do work here and in Asheville, North Carolina, which happens to be the location of our second Sierra Nevada brewery. That's just a complete coincidence. I've got Bill beat on the ridiculousness of having young children. I have actually toddler, 3.5-year-old twins, boy-girl twins. So I've been a resident.
You gotta get home.
Actually, yeah, I've already done the daycare run today. I've been here 28 years actually, and have seen a lot of the ups and downs of the market here, including when I arrived, and it was pretty sad when I first got here. We were already starting to see signs of some homelessness at that time. And even students sleeping in cars, I remember at that time. So I've seen a lot of changes here through the years, and I hope that we can help solve this problem. It's a very big issue.
Hi, my name is Brooke Storlaxon. I'm retired from the university, and when I retired, I volunteered with Habitat for Humanity, and I'm on the board, so I'm not being paid by Habitat. I'm a volunteer, and in fact, that's really the heart of Habitat, is bringing volunteers together to create community, and the byproduct is a house. We're able to produce a couple of houses a year for low-income families, and we do it by bringing people together. And I'm certainly with everybody on the panel that we need to come together to solve these problems on every level.
One more.
Yeah, and it looks like our panelist, who is the most pressing housing needs, she can't participate because she can't get childcare for her little one. So if that's not telling, I don't know what is. My name is Lauren Kennedy. I'm a caretaker. I'm the executive director of the North Valley Housing Trust, which we hope will be an answer to some of the questions tonight. And I'm a realtor with Independent Realty Group, who's been back in Chico for about 3 years. I've lived here a total of 10 years. My family's been here for about 30 years. I'd like to confess at the outset that I'm from San Jose. And thank you for having this, and thank you for having me. This is so important, and thank you guys for coming. Yeah.
Well, let's, would you join me in please giving our panelists a big hand? So let's start right in with some questions about the rental market. My first questions are for Ed. Ed, can you please provide us with some numbers as far as Butte County housing affordability statistics? And while you're at it, would you also give us the official definition by county standards of what affordability means here?
Very good, sure. So I'm going to speak with statistics generally oriented towards Chico, because in Butte County we have 5 incorporated jurisdictions. Each one looks very different from the other. So because this is a Chico-centric crowd, I'm going to stay Chico-centric. I will say that the I'll start by saying the definition of affordable housing. What is affordable to a household? The definition as currently used in most federal and state programs is that if a household is paying 30% or less of its total household income for housing and utilities, that's considered affordable. If a family pays more than 30% of their household income for rent and utilities, that's considered rent burdened. And if a household pays more than 50% of their income for rent and utilities, that's considered severely cost burdened. Chico. Chico right now has a renter household population. 37% of Chico's renter households are severely cost burdened. 37% of Chico's households, 6,900 families, are paying more than 50% of their income for rent and utilities. So Chico is considered a severely impacted community. If you think we have it bad in Chico, it's even worse in Oroville. 60% of the renter households in Oroville pay more than 50% of their income for rent and utilities. So we have an extreme, what we call a gap between the ability of households to pay for housing and the price of housing is delivered. Now, obviously, the price of housing is a function of supply. I'm going to argue here for today's discussion that we have a systemic issue with housing production where we are systematically producing less housing than we need, and this has occurred over a long period of time. It has taken us 30 or 40 years to invent a mousetrap that has systematically prevented the development of the housing we need to provide for our citizenry. The degree to which we do not develop housing sufficiently and in time will impact the community. So I have a saying. If we have to resort to affordable housing, and when I talk about affordable housing, yes, it's affordable to the household, but it means market rate housing that has been written down sufficiently to be affordable to the households who are actually renting it. So in terms of production of housing, if you fall behind the supply and demand curve in terms of the growth of your community, ultimately you'll get to a place where you have enough of a housing shortage and housing prices will rise in accordance with that shortage to where you'll need to start providing affordable housing to your most vulnerable household members, the elderly, the disabled, et cetera, et cetera. And so I say if you got to a place in your community where you have to provide affordable housing, you're behind the 8 ball. If you got to a place where your community is discussing inclusionary zoning, which is, for example, where a developer in developing a set of units in the community is being required to make a certain percentage of those units affordable, artificially affordable to certain lower income groups, that's called inclusionary zoning. If you get to there, I say you're so far behind the 8 ball that you're in deep trouble. And if you finally get to a place where your community is discussing rent control, which is a common discussion throughout California right now, you've lost the war in terms of provision of housing in time for your community. We've spent about 30 years, 40 years developing regulatory constraints in California which constrict the supply of housing. I've got 10 factors, all of which contribute. And I'll just briefly run through them and I'll park them. CEQA, the California Environmental Equality Act. Proposition 13, our state's tax structure as a result of Prop 13. Impact fees, the Williamson Act, which constricts land availability, local planning and zoning policies, the union considerations, they always want to build the housing, environmental considerations, the right to sue. Any one of you can sue a developer for any reason at any time, and cultural attitudes. We collectively, as a result of our community attitudes, have created a culture where we systematically say no to the housing that we need. This is a severe problem. So Scott invited us not to blame anybody, but I'm going to collectively blame us all. We are all in this together. We work with a representative government. Our representatives represent us, and as they represent us and our attitudes, we have not done our children and our seniors any favors. We have enriched a few classes of homeowners over the last 30 or 40 years who have enriched their interests at the expense of other classes of the community. So we are now faced with a severe affordable housing crisis in Chico. And I say all this by way of stimulating conversation. And I will say, by way of ending, that the Housing Authority, we provide affordable housing, deeply affordable housing, to about 2,500 households in the county. We provide other forms of affordable housing as well. I will tell you that we have the answers for housing affordability. We've been inventing housing programs for 80 years, since the New Deal, since the Great Depression. Unfortunately, we've never scaled anything up sufficiently to be able to meet the need. So at the Housing Authority, when we are providing Section 8 or public housing rental assistance to very low, extremely low income households, we estimate that we're only serving 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 who actually need our housing. And so we have a lot of households in the community who are desperate for housing, who will never see affordable housing by means of federal housing programs. And I think I'll stop right there.
Thank you. We're going to come back to a number of points. We're going to come back to a number of your points later on. I think the hard pill to swallow for a lot of people is that we are underproducing housing. So that's an important thing to get to later. I'm going to put a question to Randall about, because Randall sort of represents the city at this point in time. What can the city do to encourage the construction of more affordable rental housing?
Well, the big major challenge was one of the primary functions of building affordable housing was federal tax credits, low-income housing tax credits. These are tax credits that, and I'm explaining one of the problems so you can see the exacerbation of this problem, and then to have some backfill. But we'll start with the low-income housing tax credit program. This is a program that you're selling, syndicating tax credits, and that goes to develop affordable housing. It's your initial subsidy to develop. But those are tax credits. So if your taxable income through a tax reduction, a corporate tax reduction like we just had, through the Trump administration, that's going to change the marketability of those tax credits. So you're immediately seeing a loss in revenue from the tax credits. On top of that, the state of California requires a local buy-in, a local subsidy. And that used to be redevelopment agency funds. Redevelopment agencies were dissolved in February of 2012, and there's been nothing to backfill that additional subsidy. So communities like Chico that would maintain a lot of its property taxes were able to leverage the RDA funds for low-income housing tax credits, and that provided the basis for two sets of major funding for affordable housing. We don't have that anymore, either one of those. So the easiest one would be replacing some kind of tax increment financing, would be the most probably similar to what we've seen before, though not necessarily the best. By that I mean infrastructure financing districts. We can change the building standards and adjust how we tax and treat accessible dwelling units. We can defer or eliminate fees for development proposals that are consistent with what we want, and we kind of do this to some extent for affordable housing
Can you
communities.
raise your voice a little bit? We have a hard time hearing back here.
Okay,
Exactly.
that doesn't happen very often.
Stand up. Stand up.
So I said EFIDs, infrastructure financing districts, building standards and increasing accessory dwelling units, changing the fee structures so that we are encouraging or supporting or subsidizing even 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms that are more affordable or accessory dwelling units. Inclusionary zoning is certainly something, but as Ed said, once you start talking about these types of policies, you really are off the reservation considerably in trying to get back on your housing affordability. Bottom line, all of that will increase and would increase affordable housing, but the subsidies just are not there.
So of those issues that you brought up, the only one that I'm seeing that's actually on the verge of happening is accessory dwelling units being easier to build, easier and cheaper to build.
And I can't even go that far, but it looks like we're extending the olive branch to move in that direction.
Gotcha. We'll talk some more about that, yeah.
Just a note, all of we could provide housing for everyone if we did what a lot of the rest of the world does. We don't, and perhaps for good reason. But we don't allow shanty towns to be built. We don't allow tent cities. We absolutely prohibit these things. But if you go and travel the rest of the world, most of the cities of tomorrow are being built as shanty towns today. Unregulated, unpermitted, And the point is that people are people. We create shelter wherever we go, no matter what it takes. But our regulatory structure and our expectations in this country do not allow that as a solution. So we only allow formal, permitted housing built to certain codes. That really puts us in a certain frame, whereas markets fluctuate and we see rises of significant numbers of extremely low income, disenfranchised citizens from our economy. We do not allow that as an alternative.
Bob?
Yeah, but we used to allow single resident occupancy, right? SROs all over this country, where people who were single, people who didn't have the money, people who were working in the community for whatever reason. So we had those, and I think we need to have those again in our society. There's no reason that we can't have units that are small enough to allow somebody in. If we look at all the statistics, right now there's 134,000 homeless people in California, right? That's just unbelievable to me. Homeless youth, there's thousands and thousands of homeless youth. 82% of them don't have a place to go sleep at night. So there's something that we have to do. And to me, when we're talking about affordability, what is that, when we talk, if you're building a house for $165,000, is that affordable to someone who's making $1,000 a month on Social Security? It isn't. So we have to change the way we're thinking and change the way we're building in our communities, change the rules so that we can get those people inside, because most of the people on the street don't want to be on the street. Are those people, there's some there that have problems, but the reality is most people, and we have many people we house now from the street, and they're successful because they know that they have a place to sleep at night, and you create a community. SROs used to be community, right? And we no longer have those. We've disallowed those. In 1940, the average size of a house was 800 square feet. 4.7 people living in that house. 1972, the average size of a house was 1,660 square feet. 2016, it was 26,087 square feet, and the average household was 2.9 people. So we've created it on our own. We've created this problem, and we have to look for more solutions than just when I see affordable housing, it doesn't mean anything to me at all.
So when we get to the development questions, Bill and Richard and Lauren, I hope you'll help us understand why we can or can't be building smaller units. So Bob, as long as you're on a roll, why don't you tell us a little bit more about how chat helps with the local market for low-income residents?
Well, we don't actually help with the local market. We take landlords that are willing to master lease to us. So we find a landlord that says, we're going to give you a chance, and they master lease to us. We put people into a program. We find people on the street that seem to be ready to move out of homelessness.
Can you raise your voice, please? So
Sorry.
Stand up would help.
I will do that.
Why don't we just, from this point on, if you don't mind, just
Stand
standing up when you're on.
So the way chat works is we find a landlord who's willing to rent to us. We master lease that property, whether it's a 2-bedroom, 5-bedroom, 6-bedroom, whatever it is. We're now looking at an 8-bedroom house. We find people on the street that we feel are ready to move up out of homelessness, and then we surround them. We have them sign a program that they're committed to. We bring them inside, and we start working with them. We surround them with services. So what we're actually doing is taking units off the market, right? Every one of those people pays, every month they pay a fee. Let's say they're getting $900 for SSI or SDI, or when some of our people, $1,100 for Social Security, they have to pay a certain amount of that money every month to cover the cost of that home that we've rented under our master lease program. So we're taking something off the market. That's why we're so interested in Simplicity Village, because that's building new homes for people, that are creating community for people, that actually then gets them out of homelessness, brings them back into society, reestablishes faith in themselves, faith in the system, and that's what we're trying to do with chat. We're all volunteers. We're not a bureaucracy. We're not any agency. We're just volunteers doing this for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So do you pretty much assure that the rent's going to be paid? You're the assurer.
Several levels. We guarantee the rent's going to be paid, right? Every month we guarantee it, but it comes from the people who we put inside. Sometimes some of the people don't have that money. We work with them. We help them. We'll get them on Social Security or SSI if they need that. We get them dental. We get all those things. And we guarantee, not only do we guarantee the rent's going to be paid, but with our landlords or the owners of these homes, we maintain them as well. We fix them. We make sure that everything is, and we've had our landlords allow us to change the inside of their houses. And we have someone in a wheelchair and they can't get in. We'll make it, we'll put in a new bathroom for them. So we're actually working with the people in this community. The people are willing to take a risk on us putting homeless people into them, and we make sure that they are happy with what we're doing.
Quickly, at what point do you run out of capacity?
At the point where the landlord says no to us. That's number one. But the reality is, we see prices going, and I know everyone here knows that prices going up and up and up. So what something we could rent 4 years ago, a two-bedroom house for $600, $700, $800, now is $1,000, $1,100. That means people who are making $900 have to pay much more for that room. We do other things as well. We bring food once a week to people that we get donated. Every 2 months we bring canned goods to people that we get donated. So we surround them with services, I said, to bring them back into society.
Thank you. Ed, this may be best for you. Describe programs designed to keep rental housing affordable, including, could you give us a definition, in other words, of what rent control looks like, inclusionary zoning, subsidized housing, and your vision of the pros and cons of those programs?
Okay, the simplest rental assistance programs provide a direct subsidy to the renter, either in public housing, okay, thank you, Jim. In public housing, which is housing owned by the housing authority. It's actually publicly owned housing. We all own public housing here together. Housing authority administers these properties, and it's a federal rental program. The residents who live in public housing only pay 30% of their adjusted income for rent and utilities. Straight formula, very simple. There's about a 3 to 5 year wait list to get into public housing if you're lucky. Our other rental assistance programs, Section 8, provides rental assistance in the form of a contract between the housing authority and a landlord. We give a client, a household, a voucher. They go out and look in the community for rental housing. They find a house that they like, a home that they like, an apartment that they like. So long as that home is priced right and has quality standards that meet our program requirements, we will enter into a contract with the landlord and agree to subsidize the rent of that household. That household will only pay 30% of their household income towards rent and utilities. So let's say you have an apartment that costs $1,000 a month. You have a household on Social Security making $900 a month. They can pay $300 a month for rent and utilities. So they would pay $300 to the landlord. The housing authority would pay $700 to the landlord. In this program, the housing authority works with 600 landlords in Butte County. We disperse about $1 million a month in rental assistance payments. The average rental assistance payment made on behalf of our clients is about $475 a month. So that's rental housing. And those are the most formal and conservative and oldest programs we have. When you get to inclusionary zoning, there's many ways that can play out. I used to work for the county of Santa Cruz Housing Authority. Once upon a time, there was an inclusionary housing zoning ordinance in Santa Cruz. If a developer developed 5 or more housing units, 20% of them had to be made affordable to lower income groups. And when I say lower income, generally it's not the extremely low income households we're talking about being served in public housing in Section 8. It's generally lower income households, which are defined as households whose income might fall below 50% of the area median income, or even 60 or 80%. So you're talking about inclusionary zoning typically targets moderate low income households who are in distress. And when you get to rent control, of course, you're talking about situations like you might have in New York City. They've had rent control for decades to stabilize their market after World War I, when housing prices went out of sight. Basically, there's a formula by which landlords are only allowed to raise the rents by so much upon the vacancy of a rental unit. And those units obviously are extremely valuable to low-income households in New York City. But by and large, most affordable housing programs you see in the world today are income-based programs that will derive affordability anywhere, derive affordability to serve households anywhere from extremely low income. Those are households whose incomes are below 35% of the area median income for that household size. And up to 50%, that's considered low income, or very low income, or 80% of median income is considered low income. So in this county, again, most of our citizenry is low income. And most of our citizenry is challenged with housing prices by virtue of their incomes available to pay for the prevailing rents. There's a gap there, significant gap. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks. It made me think, what's the future of federal funding for the programs that you administer?
That just changed
today. Exactly.
I just came back from Washington, D.C. yesterday. I was on the Hill 2 days ago. So here's the latest from Congress. The good news, 2018, we actually saw a relatively robust housing budget. Robust, by me, when I say that we're not seeing substantial cuts to federal housing programs. And the Congress has promised our industry that next year should be about the same. I will tell you, our federal budget is in terrible shape. There is very little money to be dispersed in discretionary federal spending programs. And that small amount that's available for discretionary spending is being chewed up every year by ever-increasing Social Security and Medicaid entitlement program demands, not to mention interest on the national debt. So the prospects of the feds coming forward, I believe the feds, at least for the foreseeable future, will continue their programs, but you will not see program expansions. And I believe that the public housing program, the oldest of our programs, the program that dates back to the 1930s and the New Deal, I believe that Congress and HUD will see public housing go away. They will give our housing authority the units. They will release us from the mother of all liens that requires it to operate it under the federal low-income housing program, and they will give us Section 8 vouchers in exchange for our public housing units. The federal government doesn't really have an appetite. Our country doesn't really have an appetite for socialized housing. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. It's who we are. Do I disagree? No personal opinions. Never mind.
Didn't they just change the definition of affordable housing from 30% to 35%?
Okay. Secretary Carson and HUD has just made a proposal to change the affordability requirements, the definition of affordable housing, that in federal programs, recipients of federal assistance have their contribution change from 30% of household income up to 35% of household income. Now, back in the old days, before this 30% threshold requirement, which was a function of the Brooke Amendment in the 1960s, it's a congressional act, prices could vary in public housing properties because the rents were designed to be charged to the residents so that the property could cash flow. But through the dynamics and economies of the 1960s, it wasn't working for the residents, so the feds put in place a requirement that properties be made available at 30% of the client's given income. The feds make up the difference in terms of the operating subsidies. So public housing will go away. The rent structure that we're talking about, and the Secretary also talked about increasing the minimum rent payment from $50 a month. So in public housing in Section 8, if you come to our programs with no income at all, you're asked to pay $50 a month towards your rent and utilities. The Secretary has proposed that number go to $150 a month. So you may see things in the press talking about the tripling of rents in public housing in Section 8. It's just a tripling of the minimum rents. It's very significant to someone who has no income or very little income. So these are major changes. But in our conversations on the Hill with the good senators and congressmen, we were assured that the Secretary's proposals would get no traction on the Hill. The winds could change tomorrow. But these kinds of discussions are what is occurring in Washington. But the message from Washington is you're not going to see any major federal initiatives, barring a sea change in the country, a collapse of the economy, something. We cannot look to the federal government for a solution to our problems.
No.
So I just want to let the people at the left side of the table know we are going to get to you. We're just going to get through a few more questions on the rental.
I'm here to learn.
Yes,
I'm learning from that.
There was one bit of information that Ed didn't mention that you mentioned the voucher system in Section 8. What you didn't mention was once somebody gets a voucher, how often does it go 6 months, 8 months, and they still cannot find housing because there's nothing available?
Okay.
Just briefly.
Briefly. Okay, so this is another part of the picture to our market, so I'll finish my previous remarks when I first stood up. We issue vouchers every month. We have a waiting list of 5,500 households on our wait list, waiting for Section 8 assistance at any given time. We issue, at any given time, 100 vouchers. If I were to issue 100 vouchers, bring in 100 households off our waiting list and give each one of them a voucher, they have 60 days to use that voucher to lease up. We can extend that voucher search term up to 6 months, depending on circumstances. And for most clients, they get their voucher extended up to 6 months. The problem is in our current market with a 1% vacancy rate, there's no place for these voucher holders to lease up. Either landlords won't take the voucher or there's no availability. So if you don't already have a house you're living in that you can lease up under the Section 8 program, you're not going to lease up. So our current success rate for the Section 8 program, and I'm ashamed to say this, only 1 in 10 of the households that receive a voucher is able to lease up and use their voucher. So we go through a lot of applicants to keep our program full.
Thank you. So Randall, why would anyone want to be on the city council with these sort of conditions? That's rhetorical. That's rhetorical. But I do have a question for you. So you built the units on 8th Street.
Bidwell Park Apartments, correct?
Bidwell Park Apartments. Can you describe that experience and what the obstacles were and how you overcame them? And
Like a root canal, I is probably most perfect. Well, it started in 2005. You'll recall this was the Pear Grove Mobile Home Park, where it had a lot of calls for service from the police department, at least one homicide. It was a pretty terrible place. I began the discussions with the city to acquire the site with their blessing to have it be developed into affordable housing. Closing a mobile home park was an extremely arduous task. I swear I will never do it again. There's a residential relocation in that plan, so we relocated the residents that were already low income because they were in a mobile home park, which took easily a year and a half. And then it was the dance, the balance to find the right subsidy, whether that was going to be state subsidies or federal subsidies. In our case, we went for a 9% project for low-income housing tax credits, which exempted us from a prevailing wage requirement. That's an important distinction. If we went to a 4% that was less competitive, that would have triggered prevailing wage and would have caused our cost to spike, like our friends, I believe, over at Harvest Park Apartments on East Avenue were subject to that. In fact, their project didn't score as well competitively, and they had to go for the 4% project. A little more detail on that. But all in all, it took about 8.5 years from start of the project. It involved, I believe, it's been a while, but I think about $4 million in federal tax credits and $2.5 million in redevelopment agency loans. It's a 38-unit, 100% affordable complex for between 30 and 60% of the area median income.
what does that work out to for an apartment for a rent?
At construction, we were looking at 1 bedroom, 1 bath. So we didn't have any studios, but 1 bedroom, 1 bath was about $275 a month on the lowest end. So this is your lowest income, cheapest rent, cheapest unit. All the way up to, at the high end, 60% AMI, 3 bedroom, 2 bath, in the 850, I think, not more than $850. So to give you an idea.
I missed the numbers, but or it was a little confusing. The total cost, your investment was like $6 million?
Total development cost, I believe, were just north of 7.9 million.
7.9. And for 38 units?
38 units, correct.
What is that per unit?
Over 200,000 a unit.
Holy shit.
Just to give you some context on that,
Thank you.
pro formaing, looking at the financials for producing new tax credit subsidized units in Chico area, we're looking currently at around somewhere around $350,000 per unit. In the Bay Area, to produce a unit, we're talking around $900,000 a unit. So it's very, very expensive. But the tax credit program is unique because there's a lot of soft costs, and I won't get into the detail, that go along with that kind of delivery program. but it's a very inefficient delivery program. Needless to say, when you're looking at construction costs, you're probably looking at around $200,000, $220,000, $230,000 a unit to produce a housing unit, construction costs.
And something to be said, you have a covenant to keep those rents at between 30 and 60% of the AMI for no less than 55 years. So you're taking sub-market rent.
I'm sorry, I said 250, I mean 150. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the 55 is something new. It often in the past was much shorter than that, like sometimes 30 years. And right now, I wonder if you could say a little bit about the risk of our existing affordable housing converting to market rate as rents continue to rise, and how that's going to affect our existing crisis.
Well, I'm not sure I'm not sure those are too connected, but going back to your question, what first part of your question?
Well, the
55-year covenant.
We have a lot of affordable housing that's now at risk of converting to market rate as rents continue to rise. The people that own those, and if without the resources to buy those units, what happens?
So there were programs that would have that covenant for 15 years. They've long been dissolved. There are some of those units about 10 years ago were going to market rate, and they were absorbing a lot of the federal tax credits because you had units where people were already low income and paying subsidized rent. If they were going to go to market rate, of course, that was going to kick all of them out. So there was a priority to make sure that those units remained at market rate, but that also meant that an additional subsidy needed to be kicked in to restore the units. So there were programs that were short. A lot of those transitions occurred in the past. I imagine there's probably still some out there, but for the most part, we don't have that returning to market off those 15s. Now that doesn't mean that there still aren't another series of units.
There's a lot. There's like $40 million worth of affordable housing or more that's at risk of going to market rate in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and there are units that do. But on this particular program, on that 55-year covenant, they're starting to trickle off.
Great. So we've got one more question on the right for Bob. Bill Nash asked me to ask this question. What are affordable housing trust funds, and how can they help?
I think that's better answered by you than by me.
Okay.
Or Lauren.
Or
Lauren, yes.
Executive
There you go,
Director.
Lauren.
Trust funds, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
Big help
I didn't know
from
who to ask.
No, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Just to clarify, is it affordable housing, or is it a housing trust fund or a land trust fund? What are you talking
He
about?
called it Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
So to be a land trust fund.
Yeah, well, I think you bring up the great first point, is that not everybody knows that they're two different things. Actually, a few more different things than that even. So land trust, which Ed has more experience with at this point, is a model where you separate the value of homes from the land. It really keeps home values from spiking. It means that as values go up, that value stays in the land in a community-owned trust. Just the houses and the improvements themselves are sold. Individuals still buy and sell those on a market like you would with other market rate housing. It's just the land stays in a community or city or independently owned trust. So that's a land trust, and if Ed wants to speak more to that, certainly can. The North Valley Housing Trust Fund is one of 7 independent trust funds in California. We're the only one north of the Bay, so good job, Chico. We've got a lot of work to do up here. There are trust funds that are also associated with cities and counties. So as my understanding goes, 9 years ago, when there was still a housing staff at the city, got together to figure out what was a long-term solution for these housing issues as they came up. And this independent housing trust was the answer. And what the housing trust does is it leverages local funds. This is like your local, it operates like a bank. We're a lender, but we're a mission-driven lender that keeps rates low. We can also be a grantor, and the pooling of local funds allows us to leverage those funds for other state and federal programs as well. So if you want to make an impact on housing, you can pool your impact. The other benefit of trust is they can be a lot more nimble. So instead of working with these behemoths of these large federal and state programs, if we've got local solutions to fund, we can just solve those problems. I mean, we have regular accountability that nonprofits do, and if we have specific funds that come to us, we have to spend those the same way nonprofits do, but generally it's a much more flexible fund for addressing housing issues. Is there more to that?
No, I think that that's a good basic
Okay.
primer of it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so now the long-awaited left-hand side of the table.
Wait, so what was Bill's question?
What are affordable housing trust funds and how can they help?
How can they help? Okay, so we're money, right? So that helps. This is an affordability question. Some of the most popular, currently, we have a housing trust fund grant from the state. And if you follow housing legislation, there's going to be more of those funds available coming through on the ballot after this year. So all the housing trusts in California are getting ready for funds to be available for trust funds that haven't been available for a long time. So that's our current grant. Some of it was used with matching funds to fund the Valley View apartments that are out by the tourist shelter. That was before I came on. That was the previous director, James Coles. So now we're looking to growth into figuring out what our needs actually are. That's the beauty of the trust fund, and it's one of the reasons why I think this is exciting, because it's our job to listen to what the most pressing needs are. We have programs like Chat's Master Lease program that seems to be working to get people housed. Trust funds don't just work with homelessness and low to severely low income populations. Also, we recognize that housing goes up and down. If people with middle incomes can't afford to purchase houses, then it affects everybody below them as well. So housing trust funds work with home buyer assistance programs, rental assistance programs, rehab programs, sometimes helping affordable housing stay affordable if those terms are coming up. So there's all of these options. It'll be up to this community to figure out how much we want to fund and what those pressing needs are. Yeah.
So you only went 27 minutes over what I had allotted for the right-hand side of the table. Hey, Jim, where's Jim?
I'm here.
How are we on, if we go over, is that going to be a problem?
It will not impact any other events.
Okay. Good. Okay. So, Lauren, we're back at you again. We were going to have you talk about some statistics on housing sale prices and availability, low-high averages, how much that has increased over the last few years, and also what sort of income is required to qualify for a home purchase, and what sort of down payments are needed. Just some
Okay.
basic.
So the most recent statistic is that I spend about 50% of my time as a realtor being a therapist for first-time home buyers, because it's a very challenging time to buy your first home in Chico. Housing prices, okay, so the median three-bedroom housing price in Chico in 2012, which was our low point, was about like $213,000. That was also the time that I was still throwing out listings to my friends in San Diego that you could buy a house in Chico for $70,000. You could get well under $100,000 here. So it was 2012. The median home price as of today is for a three-bedroom is about $325,000 in Chico. So that's a huge increase in housing prices in 6 years. Yeah. More interesting to me too is that the median income in Chico in 2012, and actually in 2008, and also in 2005, and in 2018 is about $45,000. So the median income has stayed exactly the same while housing prices have made this huge leap in that time. You definitely can't find a home in Chico for under $100,000 anymore.
Is that household or per capita?
It's per household.
Household. Yeah. So housing prices have gone up. In terms of what you need to make, lenders want to give you money. They'll qualify just about anybody for a loan, but it might not be enough to buy you a house anywhere near Chico. In order to get the best rates you need about 20% down, right? So if you're looking to buy a $320,000 house, that means you have to have about $60,000 in savings. Not to make any assumptions, but I feel like maybe the millennials are not as represented in this room at the moment. That's almost me and below. It's way less than 30% of us think that we'll ever buy a home. Most savings for millennials are between like $2,000 and $8,000 between wherever you are. So this idea of having $60,000 to put a down payment is discouraging. There are programs, so you can buy a home with zero down. The USDA and FHA have programs that allow that. It just means you're going to have to add on to $300-400 a month to your rent so that the lenders can pay for insurance on that.
Higher interest.
So, yeah, it's a tough time to buy a home in Chico, for sure. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, and that's a great start to this larger conversation. So, Lauren, Bill, anybody on that end of the table, I'll just kind of start going through the questions one by one. What role do public and private sectors play in ensuring adequate land exists to accommodate anticipated growth? We've got a developer here. That's probably a good question for the developer.
That's me. So the public sector's job, government, Randall, is to craft policy. Kind of the constitution for policy in communities is called the general plan. I'm sure most everyone in this room understands what that is. Beyond that, it becomes, regulatory environment, fees, and those types of things, all of which affect the cost of producing a home or an apartment. The private sector's role, I think, is to advocate and bring some of the market realities, bring a market perspective to those discussions, bring true cost perspectives to those discussions, so we try and minimize the adoption of policies that have unintended consequences. Beyond that, I think private sector doesn't require a license to be a developer, right? Anybody can do it. And in fact, I think during what we in the business refer to as the Great Depression, not the recession in real estate, there were bones of developers that had lost everything all over town. And as markets swing and new land opportunities are available, new developers get brought in. And a developer is nothing more than the guy that's going to organize a team of professionals and builders and sign on the loan. And that's about it. So the industry kind of serves its role very well. It is driven by supply and demand, like every other market-based industry. On the public side, I think it's understanding the role and the impact that regulations and permit streamlining and those kinds of things have. I also think local government can always do a better job advocating at the state level for the kinds of housing policies in this case that do make sense and that don't have unintended consequences. The loss of the RDA was a huge hit to the interests that folks in this room have. And that was, we will never recover from that. Tremendous tool, and I think there are other tools that are coming up. We've got this gap where we lost what we had, and there hasn't been a new provision for it. But I'll stop there.
Thank you.
I think that's rather obvious.
So I want to spread it around a little bit. Brooks, would you mind sharing a little bit about Habitat for Humanity with us and how you think it could play a bigger role in addressing some of our issues?
I sincerely doubt that we could play a bigger role because the way that Habitat is put together, we have an interesting business model. We get materials that we sell through the Restore. I wore my billboard shirt. Part of the money that the Restore gets goes to new housing. We work closely with the city to provide land. We work on affordable issues, as Ed has talked about, and so our families will only pay a third of their income. And they pay a mortgage to Habitat, which we then recycle. So we have a nice little cycle here, but the cost of land is our big issue. We end up spending about $160,000 for the soft and hard costs of a house, but that excludes the land. And we work closely with the city on our last several projects, the 19th Street, the 20th Street projects that we're working on now. We work closely with the city to get the land for those houses. But we raise money. We get donations from people. We get in-kind donations from business people to put these houses together. And we have a very few number of staff. I mean, we're totally a volunteer organization in terms of labor. The board, all of us volunteer to create a community that comes together with a family to build a home. We're very proud that out of the last 25 years that we've been in existence, we've had no foreclosures. The families we partner with are sincerely committed to making this endeavor work. But we would need more staff people, we would need a whole lot more money, and we'd need land if we were to take a bigger bite of this piece, which, you know, given the resources, I think all of us are energetic enough to do it. But Habitat does have a fairly narrow slice of this housing puzzle, which I think is so interesting tonight to hear how complicated it is. We all know our own little piece of it, but to hear all of this fit together, it can be overwhelming, so I hope we stay hopeful.
Don't sit down. So Bill, I believe it was Bill that posed the question, are there opportunities for collaboration between the building industry and nonprofits like Habitat?
You know, before my time with Habitat, there was a period of time, and I think you mentioned it, that developers would give us a piece of land. And so we actually built affordable Habitat homes in subdivisions that people were building with, you know, regular homes. I don't think that's a requirement anymore, Ed, do you know? But it used to be a requirement of doing business that a piece of the piece of it went to low-income housing. And we actually have reached out to different developers in town asking for that kind of cooperation. We would certainly love to see that happen. But I think this idea of it's inclusionary, where you have this artificially reduced price and you're building a development, do you want to have a cute little Habitat house that's 900 square feet next to the 2,000 square foot house? I'm saying, yeah, let's do it. But I can hear people say, no, let's not do it. So that's what it comes down to. Our houses are 900 to 1,000 square feet, depending on if we're building a 2, 3, or 4 bedroom house. So we are in the small house market. And the houses require families of a certain size for the size of the house that we have.
So Bill, when you asked that question about collaboration, did you have something in mind?
I was thinking about the principle of it. You've got two 900-foot houses. I mean, if those became a duplex, you'd have it would look like an 1,800-foot house. And if the exterior finishes were the same, just the interior specifications might be different. The lot might be a little bit, so I think that through design, a lot of that can be mollified a little bit. But, you know, working with, you know, who's doing your architecture, I mean, kind of what the developers do, they put together those teams.
Right, they have a package.
And they'll do, last year, 275 homes. So there are economies of scale that they might be able to bend some arms and help a little bit, was my thought.
Great. Ideas on collaboration are what we need, for sure. Another thought that I just had is there any way that Habitat could work with Simplicity Village on their project? Are there any crossovers there?
Each of the habitats is an affiliate in the community. So there are habitat goals and a mission, but in a community, an affiliate determines what its goals are. So this particular habitat has a goal of building homes for families. But that doesn't mean that the board couldn't change the mission if we found a nice collaboration that would create more housing. Our commitment, though, is for people who buy their home. So that's why when Scott and I were talking, I felt it was really important to make a distinction between rental homes and purchased homes, because again, that's part of our mission. But Habitat is all about community. That's the only reason we have the houses we have, is that people help build houses. So we are open to the idea of a change in that if it works with what we're trying to do.
Sure.
Are there deed restrictions on that house? Or
Yeah.
are there are?
The houses have to be for low-income housing.
Okay.
So we've only had one house sold, again, in this 25 years, it had to be sold because of the covenant to another low-income family. Because of the loan structure, we have some, and I haven't mastered all the loans, but we get different kinds of loans, and it's required that they be for low-income housing. So you can't get a Habitat house, take advantage of the equity, sell it, and move on.
But one of the core benefits of home ownership is some type of equity built in.
Right, exactly. And in Chico, in our homes, we've only had one family that wanted to move out. And they were able to move out. There was some equity that they accrued to themselves, but the house had to go to a family that met low-income guidelines.
So Brooks, is there a reason that Habitat couldn't sponsor even smaller houses?
No, we have, depending on the land that we have built 2-bedroom houses. I don't think we've ever, again, I've only been with us for 5 years. Our smallest house is 2-bedroom, 1 bath. Our largest are 4-bedroom. But there's no reason, it depends on the kind of land we get. We want to use the land we have to its, to fulfill the purpose of the land that we get. So you wouldn't get a chunk of land and put a tiny house on it. We want to meet the requirement and meet the need of the people in Chico who qualify for housing, which right now we have a lot of families who need housing.
Scott, does the city help you at all with impact fees, with sewer fees?
Yeah,
do they work to mitigate those?
Yeah, we work closely with the city on the cost of land, but like we still pay the same fees that not developers, but somebody who wants a permit. Our permit fees are $20,000 per house. Yeah.
You have to. One of the things that the government has done is if the city provides an incentive, it triggers prevailing wage.
Yeah.
Wipes the incentive off the book.
With some exceptions, as I've been through, but prevailing wage is a constant, you're constantly aware of the potential to trigger that.
So you were able to avoid that through the low-income housing tax credit?
Correct. Redevelopment agency funds, even though they were state, were not triggering prevailing wage, and I used low-income housing tax credits, which are federal subsidies. So the two of those together did not trigger prevailing wage, even though traditionally you would expect that to be the case. Also something about tax credits, because I know Mr. Fleming was doing some math there. When you get $4 million in tax credits, you don't walk away with $4 million. You're selling that for 75, 80 cents on the dollar because it's a 10-year tax credit that you're selling it to a Walmart that has a $10 million tax liability, but that's staged out 1 year, depreciating, amortizing it all the way out for 10 years. So they aren't worth 100 pennies on the dollar to start with, but then they also, when you have a tax cut like we've had in the last year, they become even less appreciable. And so that's where you're seeing the gap. So $4 million in federal tax credits doesn't mean $4 million in cash. It could mean $2 million as the going rate we're today.
Well, I was just trying to get a sense of the actual cost per unit.
I understood.
That somebody was paying.
Right, which is why I said
Is that correct?
it's well north of 200,000. Yes, I think ours was 217, but I don't even want you to quote me like that. I don't remember what it was.
Thank you. Well, let's shift gears just a little bit. Richard, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. So I met you through Dan Gonzalez. Dan was interested in Marion Park and creating some workforce housing, and he suggested that you had some authority in that realm. So can you describe what workforce housing is? Why is it needed? How do we create it, etc.?
Oh, boy. All right. I'm a little depressed after what I've heard so far. I feel like I need to go lay down.
Well, it's good to know the information before you try to solve the problem.
Well, it is. It's a very daunting problem, to say the least. And I was thinking, when I started doing this, I started as an analyst. I was a housing analyst in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was in Sonoma County, and This was, you can't hear me, I'm sorry. That was 30 years ago. I was working as an analyst in the Bay Area, and it was 10 million people at that time in the 9-county Bay Area. Every single month, the BCAG, which is the Butte County, oh, not Butte County, what's the one down there, ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, or the Bay Area Council, it seemed like every month they would release a new study talking about the issue of affordable housing. So this was 30 years ago, and it feels like we've made very little progress in that amount of time. It's an even bigger issue now, I would say now, because back then, the homeless issue wasn't nearly what it is today. The economy, is much more complicated now, and we've had even more restrictions placed on us as a private builder, I would say, to do things. So workforce housing really is about, people in the workforce. It's not necessarily just people that are affording expensive homes. Affordable housing qualifies as workforce housing as well. Anyone who's got a job, who's a cashier or a nurse or whatever it is considered in the workforce, they need to have some type of housing available to them. And that has become, as you were saying, Lauren, a very complicated thing, because if you're a typical working class person in Chico, you're not sitting on $60,000 in your savings account normally, and you're lucky if you have money at the end of the month left over to do anything like that. So I have a loan officer that rents in an office next to me, and he tells me all the times all the issues that he's having with, kind of like you, he's doing these therapy sessions with people when they come in and they're trying to qualify for these homes, and they're just shocked at how much they have to come up with. And even at, like a 1 or 2% down for them, it's a real struggle for them to be able to do that. So the home builders that are building up in North Chico, I've heard some of the numbers from some of the people up there. They're for their homes, which are typically in the $300,000 to say $400,000 range, most of their people have at least a minimum $75,000 income that are coming in, and it's typically 2 incomes. So for them, that's great, but for the $45,000 typical median income we have in Chico, I'm not sure what happens to the rest of those people, because the rents are also up substantially. Most of the new apartment rents now are typically in the, if you're lucky, you can get a $950 one bedroom. It's up to like $1,300, $1,400 for the, oh, sorry, speak up.
I fall into that category.
Yes, please.
What a lot of people that I know that are doing, and I'm talking about people that are my age, that are college educated, they have jobs paying $15 an hour, renting rooms in people's houses. So I rented a room when I first got to Chico. I had some savings, but I didn't have any credit. I didn't have a job. So I just went on Craigslist and rented a room and a bathroom for $500 a month in somebody's house. There's a lot of houses around here that have a lot of extra rooms. And I don't know if there's a program like this in Chico, but my hometown, which is in Vermont, had a problem where, I don't like being the center of attention, but there's a lot of big houses built back at the turn of the century. And there's a local program to help homeowners to convert those houses into, some walk-off apartments. And there's a lot of extra space laying around, and I see it all over the place here too.
What's interesting about that? So when I was in the Bay Area, back, this is decades ago, even then, working professionals were getting together and renting houses together. It was a pretty common thing to do, to rent a room. What's happening now with the baby boomers all kind of transitioning, we have over 75 million baby boomers that are going into retirement or have already retired. A lot of them live in larger houses in the suburbs or whatever, and they're now wanting to downsize or get out of where they are and maybe looking for a smaller. Those houses are not getting bought up by the millennials, because the millennials simply can't go into a master plan community or a gated community and go buy a house. So down in Stockton, what I noticed about probably 7 or 8 years ago, right as things were really starting to hit the fan with the recession, there were already 3 or 4 families sometimes living in these bigger houses that were built by some of the big national builders. They were already starting to do this multi-generational move into these houses. I think you're going to see more and more of that happening just out of just pure need. And most of these are working class people, so I guess it qualifies as, as workforce housing, but that's one way to solve the problem, I guess, is to, take advantage of what's out there, what vacancies we have.
Why isn't it happening right now?
Why isn't it
Yeah,
happening?
why isn't it working?
Can I,
Yes, go ahead, please.
I was gonna ask if I could address that.
Yes, do, please.
And I may want to touch on it as well.
Okay, I'll try to
And
go quick.
Bob had his finger up there for a minute, too.
Oh,
Go right ahead.
okay, it's juicy, it's a confession. I already confessed
Restate
that,
the question.
okay, why isn't it happening? Why aren't people moving into these houses together? Okay, so the confession, you already heard that I'm from San Jose. My other confession is that I've lived on communes before. This is my entry to real estate, was actually in community property buying. Not because I particularly wanted to save the world or start a utopia, but it seemed like it was actually a solution out of the housing issues we were having. But most of those projects fail, and I wanted to know why. Why, if this is a solution, why do they fail? And a huge piece is cultural, because people think of community housing as an absurd, like commie or socialist joke. There's a lot of stereotyping around it. Partly it's uncomfortable. In the last generation or two, we've lost just the basic skills to get along in collaborative groups when we live with each other. Most of us, a lot of us who are born in this country are not raised in multi-generational households, so we've lost those skills for taking care of the elderly. We outsource almost all of our services. We put this huge, we put privacy and independence and autonomy on a pedestal, but pushing away all of these potential solutions is causing bigger and bigger infringements on that autonomy and independence. So honestly, why don't we do it more? I think it's just a lack of skills and models. The best way that I've found is for people to go visit places where it's working, see that it works great, try it out with your friends. There's 3 tools that I teach. I do a workshop. I'm doing another free workshop on it next month. You need good governance and good communication. It's very baby steps to learn how to do it. That's one of my takes. But the other reason is that none of our houses are designed for multiple people to live in. It's great that people are so resourceful. One of your questions, Scott, is how is the economy driving solutions right now? How does the squeeze of an economy propel people to solutions? Yeah, when people are poor, they have to make do with situations that they don't necessarily like. That's a terrible way to find solutions. It's not fun. You want to get out of them as soon as possible. So we shouldn't be forced to live in houses that are not designed to meet community needs. We have only houses right now designed to meet this very brief stage of the American dream, which is this autonomous 3-bedroom, everybody has everything in their own house. You talked about how much the houses have grown. So it's cool. I grew up in one of those houses. Real people live there. I don't mean to put them down, but it's not giving us these options. So you said you were depressed. I get it. Like I said, I'm becoming a therapist. I'm actually really excited because having grown up in San Jose, a place that just fell into urban sprawl and that was a ghost town in their downtown by the 2000s, I feel like Chico is in such a great place to actually come up with solutions to do something different. And I believe those solutions are small and driven by small developers. I hope that everybody heard that piece about how you don't necessarily need a huge amount of training. It's an art for sure. I don't want to put it down, but I believe it's an art form that's best learned and practiced by the people who are directly affected by the outcomes of development.
Yes.
So
Great.
that's my opinion.
Thank you. And Richard, I want to come back to you for just a minute on the workforce housing issues. So we're wanting to attract businesses to our area that can pay a living wage, and to do that, we have to have housing for them. What's the key to getting that niche built, that sort of housing?
Well, yeah, we are having a a hard time attracting businesses in this community, and we've actually lost some businesses recently. So
Is it housing?
is it housing that's
Is
the
that
problem?
what it is?
Housing is part of the problem. We don't have available housing that people can afford, and we don't necessarily have the right housing. So we're hyper-focused on single-family homes in the suburbs or apartments, all market rate, because that's all that's really working right now. And even now, as of the last 2 weeks, there's been 6 developers I know of that are walking away from their multifamily developments. They cannot make it pencil. It's not going to work. You're looking at $200,000 to $250,000 to build an apartment unit, and that's for like a 2-bedroom apartment. It doesn't make any sense. I mean,
Can you see why?
Can I see why?
Yeah,
Oh,
why?
I know
Why is it
in the
why?
details. Well, if you want to get into all the details of it, I mean, well, I can talk about how much costs have risen over the last 5 years. Everything from lumber to insulation to labor to land, and then there's the expectation once you see what some other guy has got for his land or what some other guy got for his units. Well, I got to get that too. So then there's a whole other thing with that. So what happens is everybody goes for the same market sector. Everybody goes for the market rate. Everybody goes for the single family home that's going to return the highest number or whatever. So we miss this gigantic portion of the market, which is single people, the couples. 65% of our population is 2 people or less. So it's like, why are we so focused on the other third? So we can do small houses. We can do studio apartments, 1-bedroom apartments, whatever it is. We've got duplexes. We've got quads. We can do 6plexes, whatever it is. There's this whole what they call the missing middle that we're missing right now, and that's the difference between the apartments.
The challenge is an economic challenge.
It's very much an economic challenge. I could talk about all day how great it would be
Yeah.
to do that, but when you sit down and start looking at the numbers and trying to make it work,
Costs have gone up faster than rents or prices.
So
Yeah.
of all those factors, which do we have control over? Which can we control? I mean, we're not going to change lumber prices.
Development impact fees.
Impact fees, right now it costs the same impact fee to do a 3-bedroom apartment as it does a 1-bedroom apartment.
Which encourages people to build 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms or
Yeah.
5 bedrooms, because that cost factor is spread out over that amount of space, and so it's a better deal for the builder to build something that's 450,000 than 75,000 or 100,000.
That's what.
More
because
communities
it
are
doesn't
actually
pencil.
building a small house is 400 square feet. There's a community in Colorado, and it's working, and they're putting millennials in. They're making a community, so it has a place for them to store their toys. They're interested in having a place for their bike and their boat. And they're computer commuters, So Gonzalez is looking for something similar to that. And I think in collaboration with the city, this is something that'll work. It's working in other places. Why don't we use that model? I don't understand. It's so frustrating.
The inside scoop being that we're all from the same small town here. We have a very tight-knit development community, mostly, I would say, incestuous, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not against that. It's like that in every community I work in. I work all over the country, and it's the same thing. If you don't have a lot of national builders or regional builders in your market, you've got a tight-knit group of probably 2nd or 3rd generation guys who are doing this. They have a certain type of development they like to work in, and that's just what they want to do. So the problem is that they miss that whole other like 60 or 70% of the market. So, someone else has to come in and do that. And not a lot of times they don't have the experience to do it. So we rely on people to go out and be crazy enough to want to be a developer. Number one, you have to have something somewhat wrong with you, or just be completely egotistical, because there's really not a lot of. No offense, Bill. Or love it.
Yeah,
I love
he's a survivor.
But it's getting more and more challenging. So with the impact fees, so getting to your 400 square foot unit, now that has to pay the same amount as a
I know.
6-bedroom house in Canyon Oaks pays the same fee as you do.
Right.
You could have one person in there and you're going to pay the impact.
Which is $14,000? What's?
Oh no, it's much more than that.
22 to 25, depending on.
Well, that's not including school fees and all of that.
It's city
permits. Yeah. So now what they're proposing is, in the latest round, is that apartments are going to be at $20,000. So
No, this is ridiculous.
it makes no sense.
It makes.
So any economist who's out working and doing consulting on this issue will tell you don't want to go above 10% typically of your fee being a portion of your cost. We're well above that here in Chico. We're going to be way above that. Yeah.
I don't know which order of you was waiting to ask the next question. I
Let me
think,
follow up on that, because
okay,
we talk about
and then Bob, and then Ed.
we say they're too high, but
For certain uses, yeah.
the city has to receive that revenue. The impact fees, the industry hates them. They don't hate them because they're expensive, because the developer's going to pass that cost on. But in any demand-side market, which Chico is absolutely a demand-side market, when you increase the cost of a product, a new product, you increase the cost of all other products that are existing. So the whole community pays a premium for a $26,000 impact fee that goes to the city. You're generating tens of millions of dollars that are going to banks and landlords and everybody else, except it's not going to fix our roads, our streets, build our parks. The only solution to that is, and this gets back to Prop 13.
Yeah.
Prop 13 was a mechanism that was intended to say, look, state's not going to decide how you spend your money. We're going to give that to control to locals. If you want good police, you want roads, you want parks, pass a bond. Chico's never done that. A lot of communities have done it, but it spreads that broad-based funding out and allows the housing market to work a little bit more at equilibrium rather than $26,000 a unit for a single-family house and $20,000 for a multifamily unit. Because it doesn't pencil, that's a really huge component of it.
So everybody would have cost added to what, their
I
property
mean,
taxes?
you're talking nominal. When you spread it over the community, it's, I don't know what it would be, $50 a year or something?
In order to drop impact
Yeah,
fees
but-
to a manageable level that would
But when you
stop
charge
accelerating.
$20,000 for an apartment unit, that's got to be reflected in rent. I mean, I think that, when I was looking at it, it was a $4,000 increase equated to about a $50 increase in rent on the new units. Now, when the new units are up, you're going to, again, other rents in all existing apartments are going to rise. Everyone's paying it.
Except corporations.
Except corporations.
Except corporations, if I may. I was going to talk about
I moved from Southern California, from Anaheim. I was raised there. And I moved up there, one of the reasons, because I couldn't afford a home over there in Southern California at all. And when I moved up here, the housing market was really, really good, but we couldn't afford a home. And then some of these homes that were available, these people that usually get the homes, they pay cash, they have the cash available, and they remodel the home and then sell it for a higher price. But for us people that really want to afford a home that only make about $40,000 a year, it's really hard. And it's really hard, and I've had the opportunity to at least try to buy a home, but these are the people that have the cash on hand, right? Like, we don't have that are able to do that. So it's really sad that, people like us that are trying to buy our first home can't do it because all these other factors. And hopefully in the future there is something, because there's a lot of people out there that can't afford a home, and that's why we have that meeting. right here at this point.
What's the smallest home you would be interested in buying?
Two better. I have two small. I like you. I started a family. I have a 14-year-old boy and an 8-year-old boy, and my wife, and we've been trying to get a home, but unfortunately, it's just on a 2 or 3 bedroom home at least for us. But I hope there's something come out.
Two comments on that. Well, first of all, hi, Lauren.
Hi.
Admission of San Jose and Sunnyvale. I grew up in Sunnyvale, which is a couple cities in San Jose. And another thought on the children. My wife just gave birth to our second child 12 days ago. So not sleeping much at all.
No, you're part of the growth problem.
Yeah, correct. So to that point, I live in a 1,252 square foot house that, of course, I was expected to be expanding that with the size of this family growing. And what ended up happening is I actually live in about 700 square feet. And that was completely the opposite of what I expected. So just personally, I don't know what my limitations are on how small I would live. With 4, maybe a little bit tough, but I think that's I'm 45 years old, so I'm not a millennial, but I think that general direction is, yeah. So I think we're moving towards smaller environments or smaller houses. However, a nod to the systemic nature of this problem is that, and this isn't specific to the city of Chico, it's the entire state of California. We're disincentivized to build housing as municipalities. And you've got to think about it, again, back to Proposition 13. We capped property taxes, rolled them back to 1978 levels, and you have a 1% increase in the value that's taxed, maximum of 2%, so 1% over the rate of inflation. That curtails the revenue that governments get in order to finance government. How do we fund government in the state of California? Property taxes and sales taxes with additional transient occupancy tax. So we know as communities, to build housing is not going to pay for the police and fire services that we need, but to build an auto dealership absolutely does. And this was true of what RDAs used to do in the 70s. They would, that's why you have Roseville Auto Mall and you have the Capitol Expressway Auto Mall, because they were developing with redevelopment agency funds, almost the biggest insult, developing large swaths of land, not for housing, but for the thing that would bring the highest tax revenue, which is sales tax revenue, automobile dealerships. This problem still exists. Proposition 13 is a major part of the restriction, and it also creates the disparity in who's paying for the services in the community. Right? My next door neighbor, who bought the house 20 years ago, is paying 1/6 the cost of the property taxes that I'm paying because I moved in there last year. You know, I mean, that is the disparity in revenue production for cities and counties, and exacerbates the
Ms. King.
You know, I'd like to suggest that there are two things about Chico that are actually unique in terms of the problem we're talking about. And I'd also like to suggest, or I'd really like to hear feedback on a suggestion to fix it, this problem that Randall particularly was just talking about. The two unique things are a university and a community college for which Chico is a bedroom for, a university that has historically attracted the second smartest child from very wealthy families in Southern California, in the Bay Area. It's funny because, and the second issue, which is tied to that, is that the last time I looked, and it was a long time ago, but I doubt if it's changed much. The last time I looked, R1 properties, single-family dwellings, only 29% in this town were owner-occupied. At that time, the statewide average was 67%. Wow. Therein lies the problem. Now, the issue is, it seems to me, boils down to two things. One is this focus on high income, high profit building that has gone on the whole almost 40 years I've lived here, subsidized by the city's antiquated permit system that charges $25,000 for a mansion and $45,000 for an apartment. That obviously it has to change. Why can't it change? Well, I would suggest to you that I don't remember in all the years I've lived here the city ever asking for a property tax increase. The schools have, the parks have, and for the most part they've gotten them, but the city never has. I would suggest to you that the reason is political. We have this odd political situation in Chico and in Butte County where it is less expensive to run for the Board of Supervisors than it is for a city council seat. Why is that? At the board level, we have districts. You got to raise it, you got to get your message to about 25,000 registered voters. But in the city, you've got to get it to 55,000 voters because we don't have districts. So, I would suggest to you that that we desperately need a property tax increase. We are $360 million, this is my understanding, behind in our road improvement fund. We don't have a decent road in this whole damn town. And that is because we have screwed up this, we have made, the only people that are listened to in terms of the property tax, or the permit process, are the builders. And most of them are very decent people doing what businessmen do, okay? I think the rest of us need to wake up and get involved as we are tonight, and thank you for putting this together. So we can change this. A property tax, I mean, think about it. A property tax in a town that's has so little home ownership is probably going to pass because everybody gets a vote in it. However, in terms of who gets elected to the city council, it's more and more getting to be who raises the most money. And if we look, and if you look at Chico Soul, our online investigative newspaper, you will see who the big donors are. Okay, these are all things that are easily fixed, and I agree. And my last bias, and I'll get off my soapbox here, is that we, you know, I can hear it coming now. We're getting set up to hear that the reason prices are so high here is we just don't have enough land. I say baloney to that. Even if it's true, it's time to go up, not out. I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. Yes, sir.
Ed started this with a really good, cogent explanation of what the problem is. And I had 10 things down here. You listed 8 of them. All right? Chico does have a land supply problem. Vertical development makes a lot of sense, and we need to make sure that happens. But there's an economic metric about, and rents have to go way up before it makes sense to redevelop some properties. So redevelopment's great, but it doesn't happen because we want it to. It happens because there's an economic reason for it to happen. Vital. You can't knock down a 5,000-foot tire shop right now and build a commercial building or a commercial building down below and residential up. When rents double in town, you might be able to afford to do that. It's that bad.
What about density, better density on Greenfield?
We're talking.
Our R1 is like 6 units to the acre. It doesn't even pay the property tax, doesn't even pay the infrastructure. We get that up to 12, 14 units to the acre, and the property tax will actually pay for the roads.
You can do that with R2 development. I know,
but a tiny village is 15 units per acre.
Yeah, that's our tiny village is a planned unit development. Yeah. The laws are, there's plenty of policies set up to accommodate that. Somebody in this room ought to start a group, make it happen. If it works,
I wish I knew somebody.
The point I wanted to underscore was, and this goes, I mean, if you haven't been on the legislative analyst site, California, nonpartisan, you can almost any analytical tool these days is saying that the problem is supply, it's production. California has grossly underproduced the kind of housing it needs, which is market rate housing. When you introduce market rate housing, that frees up existing housing, which is typically less affordable, and the whole cycle starts moving. When you limit, which California has done, I'm not putting a value judgment on that. Some people might think it's great. You probably don't think it's great. So Chico's been building less than half of the market rate units it needs to build in order to keep up with demand.
And that's a statewide problem. That's not just
It's-
Chico. It's
yeah.
worse in other parts of the
Yes.
state.
Let me tell you why. Let me tell you why Chico is unique.
Yeah.
Chico is much like, and it's worse in California on the coastal communities. They got the Pacific Ocean in the front of them. They've got mountains behind them. Chico's the same way. We've got the Green Line and prime best agricultural land in the world on the west side, and we've got mountains behind us. We've got environmental constraints on one side of 99 north of town, and we've got ag land on the other. We're not going to grow in the east. We're not going to grow to the north. We don't want to grow to the west. When I talked earlier about the public's responsibility and the private responsibility, we talked about a general plan. Well, general plan is going to expire at 2030. We need to be thinking 4 and 5 generations down the road. And we don't have a lot of options in this community. Then you begin to look, okay, what happens if you don't have an option? How does that change your community? How does it gentrify? It changes your society. Price goes through the roof. You become a community that has inbound traffic from every direction, every morning. And none of those people are paying our fees.
And I'd say that's exactly the same problem with the city's finances as well. We can just take that exact problem and drop it into the city's budget, and I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, no, it's.
I think one of the biggest conversations that we have coming up in the future of this city is if it requires growth to supply the housing that we need to have a healthy and affordable living community, how are we going to do that? Do we want to go out or do we want to go up? And I guarantee you there's going to be people that are vehemently against both.
I built a three-story apartment complex on a state highway, and we were lambasted because you don't see three-story anythings in Chico, quote unquote.
So, just roughly, since we're talking about this lack of housing, and what would it take to let's say we all agree, let's say, that we have an unstable housing market. We're not meeting our citizens' needs. So what's really the issue? How many units do we need to build right now to give us what we need? And I'm not talking about affordability. I'm just only going to speak to units. We have about a 1% vacancy rate right now.
Where, that is absolutely incorrect.
Tell me.
I'll tell you why it's incorrect. I'm a multifamily owner and operator.
Yes, sir.
It takes me 8 days to turn an apartment, okay? That's 2%, right there, okay? So I have one property that has a very high turnover per year. I have another one that's at about 50%. I've run the numbers. It's about 2%. The only credible data about vacancy in this town is from CoStar. CoStar's been tracking it for many years. They track about over 12,000 units in Chico of multifamily, okay? The vacancy tracks between 4 and 5%. The problem, so we have a tight supply situation, but it's not 1%, just for starters.
Okay.
The data that came from NVPOA, I'm a member, they're my friends, but it's a very small sampling. And it's from a lot of people who bullshit their way through and say, really, I have no vacancy, when all of us do.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that. So I will, let's say, for the purposes of my point, I will agree with you. We have a 2% vacancy rate.
At minimum. At minimum.
Okay, let's just start there. We have a 2% vacancy rate. Now, our community has a growth rate, a background growth rate. Historically, it's about 1.5% to 2% a year.
I think it's over 2.
Okay. I will agree with you again. Next highest bidder. So let's say our growth rate is 2.5% per year.
I think that's closer to the reality.
Maybe 3%. That, in planning terms, is still considered slow growth. Slow growth is defined as anything less than about 4% per year. Moderate growth, in planning terms, is about 4 to 6% per year. Fast growth is something more than 6% per year. So Chico actually, in terms of accommodating our own growth, it has a relatively modest issue in front of us. We don't confront fast growth rates. We're not growing at 10% a year like Anchorage was in the mid-1980s, Anchorage, Alaska. We are only growing at 2.5% per year. So at 2.5% per year, we should have, to have a healthy vacancy rate in the community, about a 3 to 4% vacancy rate. So we're shy. I'll say, for the purpose of our discussion here, let's say 2%. How many units do we need to make up a 2%, to add 2% to our vacancy rate, to allow some hypothecation, some translation in our markets, some liquidity in our markets? You would need to produce about 763 housing units today to achieve that 2% vacancy rate. Let's also say, for the purposes of hypotheticals here, we have about 500 to 700 unsheltered households in Chico, unsheltered homeless. If we want to put them in housing too, let's go ahead and add 500 units. So 500 and 763, we need about 1,200, I've figured 1,500 units right now to stabilize our market, to stop the rent appreciation from knocking our socks off.
You're just talking about rental housing.
Now I'm talking,
So multifamily.
actually, I'm talking all
All
housing,
housing.
all housing types.
But the primary issue is
And-
not that, it's the affordability, because the cost
Well,
of,
that's
of
the-
new construction
and
is so high
availability. It's
that you
both.
can't put it, you could put supply in, you wouldn't be able to find people who can afford it.
Correct. So I'm just talking about numbers of units. So we need 1,200, 1,500 units today. Ideally, they're affordable, but we're not there yet. We're just talking about producing the footprint in the first place. So we need that amount of housing today in order to sort of stabilize what's happening in our markets. Since the Great Recession, we've gone from our 3 to 4% vacancy rate steadily down to, let's agree, 1.5 or 2% vacancy rate, which is not necessarily so healthy. We see rental dynamics from 80% of median income on down in the market, and our renters, even with vouchers, are not able to secure units. And we have a lot of cooperating landlords in the county. So we see a shortage of housing. And so we quantify that 12 to 1,500 units to stabilize our market, and that's all housing units, and regardless of price. Then you get to the price issue, and then we start talking socioeconomics. So,
I would ask you to elaborate on one point that you didn't bring up, and that is the housing authority rewrite of a contract. So my contract for my residents is about 7 pages long. The federal government contract that comes in is 12 pages long, and it rewrites the entire contract that the landlord has. They won't baseline it to California law, which is very liberally constructed, that is very pro-resident. Okay, they have their own method of doing it. So there's a lot of resistance from landlords to basically take their standard forms, throw them out the window, and go with a whole new contract, which they have to administer, have legal counsel review, train their staff on. The housing authority has no ability to not use that federal contract. So there's a lot of reluctance there. I won't touch them because of that fact alone.
I understand. This is so. What you say is true, but I'll also say we work very happily with 600 landlords in the county.
That's great.
Who are happy to work with our program because they're interested in serving their community. And we don't. The participation of landlords is strictly voluntary. There's no law that says you have to accept Section 8 rental voucher holders. And yes, we do have complex contract documents, et cetera, et cetera. But the program does work. It does deliver, and it does function. So I don't want to really disqualify it on our work on that basis. But I'm really just trying to hear in this conversation.
No, you do good work.
about-
You'd have more landlords if they weren't forced into those contracts. That's all I'm saying.
I'm with you. Thank you. So again, the point here, though, is we need to produce units. We're not getting after it for all the reasons we've discussed here, and a lot of them have to do with the gauntlet. We develop housing in the community. Other developers here. It's like running a gauntlet. You don't know what the process will bring. You're likely to get a permit at the back end. If you're lucky, you never know what the planning commission is going to throw at you, and then city council by way of conditional approvals for your project. We get sued. The last project we worked out on East Avenue, Harvest Park, we were sued by the neighbors next door. It cost a 6-month delay, and it cost us $150,000. I have never once been in a housing development mode and walked into a public hearing and had anyone stand up and say, "We thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for bringing affordable housing to our community." It is always 100% been, don't bring those people here. We don't want to see it. We don't want the densities. We don't want low income, even though we're low income, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's our communal attitudes, our own attitudes towards development and growth that is paralyzing our ability to develop housing.
That's number 9 on my list.
I'm gonna kind of move toward.
I just want to say thank you really quick, because I live at Harvest Park, and if it wasn't for that, I would be living over the freeway, somewhere on the freeway.
I wanted to mention that, the development impact fees are directly related to costs that the city incurs. We have to collect those fees because we have costs in the city that employees, papers, staples. So as employee costs go up due to workers' compensation, pension costs, injuries, that type of thing, those fees continue to go up. In fact, they're direct nexus fees that are associated with the cost that the city pays to operate its business. So another way to reduce that down is to roll down the employee cost.
The elephant in the room is the pension.
That's
another meeting.
Yes, but it's also workers' compensation costs as well. That's the big ugly in the state of California. For pension across the United States, but workers' compensation costs are 7 to 8% per year.
There's topics for a number of meetings here. We're gonna try to get through this one. So I want to go to audience questions. It's 7:50. We're gonna go to about 8:20 and then wrap it up, and we'll see what questions we can get in. I've got question cards here. If you filled out a question card, I'm gonna read from these. Did you have a question, sir?
I was, in response to Ed's comments about all of the constraints and hardships of housing, and I know you spoke about ADUs in the very beginning, but the ADU law in California cut through all of that.
Cut through a lot of red tape.
Cut through all that. You can have 2,000 units or 1,500 units a year built in Chico, California, if that was our focus. And so really it's
cut the impact fee in half from $14,000 to $7,000.
Well, it's not even that. Just the red tape, the idea that it's zoned in instead of zoned out, is that there's a gigantic solution in ADUs, and we should be focused on that.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to, I shuffled these. I'm just going to go through them as they turned out in the deck. Question here is, how about tiny home villages like Opportunity Village and Hope Village? Demonstrably the least expensive way to house the most amount of people in the least amount of time, question mark. So I'm not quite sure what the question is there. How about them, Bob Troush?
Well, right now in California, they are suggesting that we need 350,000 units a year right now to catch up, right? They're building 78,000, so it's going to get worse and worse. Another thing that we know is that more and more people are working part-time instead of full-time. We have a corporate model right now that pays minimum wage, no benefits, no insurance. So we see that model out there. So we're going to have more and more and more people on the street making, maybe even with Social Security, $1,000, $1,100 a month. The thing that works is our idea for community. We make it community. I've learned to hate the word nuclear family because it isolates you. What we talk about is bringing people into a community, making them feel safe, making them feel secure, making them working together. And that's one of the things that we're talking about with Simplicity Village. It's actually happening all across this country. And the model is actually changing right now. Houses from 170 to 450 square feet are happening around the country. And many of them, Detroit, Texas, Madison, Milwaukee, are doing rent to own, so that a person has an opportunity to have value as they pay for that structure. And those are the things we're talking about. And that means city council, county supervisors have to get out of the box and think differently about what is a tiny home. We're talking about payments for the service fees. Well, if you have 15 houses or 20 houses on 1 acre of land versus 3 or 4, which is actually the new model when you're talking 2 or 3 car garages and a home on it, 2,500, 2,700 square feet, our model actually works and actually pays for itself. And you're using so much less land. It takes a change in hearts and minds as to what is affordable, what is a community, what is acceptable in your neighborhood. And as Ed was saying, the pressure he gets, we have to change that matrix, that thinking that a small house or someone in a smaller home is a bad person or a worse person than someone that's in a big home. And that change takes a heart and mind change. We have 110 churches in this community. Safe Space, years of working, has 11 churches that allow us to use those churches. What's happening to those other 100 churches? We need the community to look differently at what homelessness is, how it was created, what's happening in our community, and get on board with start to build smaller homes for people that can afford them. We have people in our homes, actually we just referred a family to you that was living on the street, they got their kid back, they're both employed. I said, get a hold of you guys, maybe they can get into a home. We're seeing that model work because they're surrounded with other people who are lifting them up. They're surrounded with community. To me, honestly, when I think of the word nuclear family, it makes me sick any longer because that isolates you. And we've isolated each other, which allows us to feel that those other people out there don't have and don't deserve what we have. And we have to change how we think about people in this community and who those people are. There are people in those communities. And we have to change our hearts and minds and the city council to let them be able to see that what we're talking about actually works.
There may be another opportunity because tiny house villages, I'll tell you a quick 20-second story. One of my business partners built the Chico Courtyards apartments on Pillsbury. And you may notice they're kind of bizarre, they're very boxy, right? You see, this is over by Round Table Pizza and prefab. Yeah, prefab. They were prefab because they were going to be subject to prevailing wage. So we had them built in Idaho and run out on a rail car so that they could stack them together and avoid prevailing wage. It probably didn't work out quite as well as we wanted to. Tiny House Village eliminates the need for prevailing wage if it's on public land. So if this is a burden, how are they any different than a rail car? We're literally building them someplace else, however we're going to do that, and we need city land. So if you're invoking the city's subsidy because of that, you're not subject to prevailing wage.
You know, there's another, a basic concept that we don't look at, but it is working, are mobile home parks.
Yes.
Absolutely. The easiest opportunity.
Try and build one today, though, or get one permitted for it today. Really difficult.
To build one or tear one down, it's a nightmare.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, you're talking.
It is affordable.
1,000, and they're really good parks.
Yeah.
That ought to be something we.
Yeah, I have a
So true,
story.
we overlook that all the time.
Yeah, I have a story related to that, actually. I was going to bring that up, so I'm glad you did. I have a colleague over at the City of Woodland, the Development Director, Steve Coyle, and he is pushing very hard within that city to have more mobile homes within areas where they're typically not allowed. They're going to start rezoning areas for more mobile homes. And you can design them to be very, very nice.
Or modulars.
Yeah, they're fantastic. You get really nice communities out of them. And I've been, they're all over. I mean, even in Chico, you go, they're actually really nice. You know, there's a lot of them around here. And in Santa Rosa, unfortunately, when they had the fires, they lost one of the remaining ones that was an all-senior mobile home park. And I don't think they're going to be able to rebuild it, unfortunately. I don't think the zoning still allows that. So, anyway, I think it's a great solution. And those you can get for 30 to, what, 45,000? Yeah, it's a lot cheaper than
rent land.
Yeah, yeah. It's a great solution.
Cash cows.
Question here is, how can ordinary residents like us work to encourage changes that will increase affordable housing? For example, getting supportive people elected, policies enacted, etc.
Indivisible meets every Thursday night. Actually, every other Thursday night now.
Now every other Thursday night, yeah.
Get out the vote.
Get out the vote.
And also it means get out your wallet, unfortunately. You know, if we don't support the people we want in office, they're not going to get in office. It's that simple. Because
But you can also walk precincts. Boots on the ground, folks.
You know, I'm a little uncomfortable that that's the direction we would take in this meeting.
You're right, I apologize.
Because you also, if you want to become effective, become informed.
Yeah.
Involved.
This is, I'd like to respond to that question.
Meetings.
Can you repeat it? Can you repeat the question?
How can ordinary residents like us work to encourage changes that will increase affordable housing? For example, getting supportive people elected, policies enacted, etc.
Yeah. You guys aren't ordinary. You showed up to a public housing forum. This is an exceptional group.
That's right.
So, okay, next confession. I also am one of the organizers this year of a Safe Space Winter Shelter. I believe that housing is a human right, and I believe everybody should have shelter. I am not anti-real estate, and I'm not anti-development, and I'm not anti-property owner. Sometimes these camps are placed against each other, right? My MO is to have a stable community, and it involves a lot of listening. It involves a lot of listening, and I'd say Chico's biggest problem right now around housing, and it's kind of exciting for me because I never was served well by our polar two-party system, and it's starting, the differences are really starting to crumble, right? So we have these like conservative cash-saving options. Our build is these like liberal commie schemes, but those are actually, you know, when you can talk, when you have somebody's ear and you can talk to them about it, what you're doing is saving money. You want to increase safety and have a place where families can grow up and not be in debt, have a city that's fiscally solvent. These are all conservative values that need these progressive out-of-the-box solutions, so that's exciting to me. But so please, it sounds cheesy, but start with small conversations that aren't polar. We have housing prices have gone up 7% each year the last 2 years. I'd say that like violent, polarizing conversations have gone up at least 7% per year over the last 2 years. Every time I hear people take on an issue, it's like this in this town, and it's just getting worse. So I think learn how to have safe conversations with your neighbors, because the biggest issue of all of this, you want to change impact fees and develop ADUs and put up multiplexes, all of these great conservative solutions. You're not going to do it without political will, and you don't build political will unless you have conversations with your neighbors. So start in your neighborhood. Keep learning about housing, and I would say too, the biggest thing for me entering into the housing arena is a little bit of a black sheep sometimes, I feel like, is that there's this reliance on real big solutions, and they're wonderful. Thank you, Housing Authority, for the work that you do. My God, as you showed me the bureaucratic math that you work with. Thank you, council members, for the work that you do. I know what it takes to do governance. Thank you for volunteering at a nonprofit. Holy moly. So these big solutions are important, but none of them are going to get it done. So my plea would be, please feel empowered to just start small, right in your front door. And it feels like it's not going to work, but it's the only thing that will work. If the problem is that we financed our way into these huge solutions, we're not going to keep financing our ways into other big solutions to fix them. So please start small.
And paying attention, a nod to Bill's comment, and I respectfully appreciate that. I tried to keep as nonpartisan as possible, so I didn't enter any.
Well, we're not all wearing buttons. Vote for Scott.
No, but we are wearing an assessor, so I apologize. What I did want to mention is getting informed.
I'm not wearing a button.
The water changes as you get closer and closer to a November election cycle, especially if that election cycle becomes consequential. So staying informed is important, but understand that your observations can get very weird around June, July, August, and they'll be dramatically different in January, February.
You know, if it's quick, Eileen, go ahead.
The question is to the people at this end of the table, and I think, and it involves, we've talked about the cost of putting a dwelling, without defining the dwelling, on property to house as fast as we can for the least amount of money we can. If we have 2 acres of public land, and we put 40 small 400 square foot houses on that 40 acres without plumbing, without just the dwelling, without the plumbing, do we bypass the $20,000 impact fees? Can you house those 40 people in those 40 dwellings on city property without having the $20-something thousand applied to that
So
dwelling?
you're talking about 40 bedrooms with a community center that serves for all the other purposes?
Yes.
Okay, would you have to pay impact fees?
Yes.
You're subject to them, and they would absolutely be deferred. They would have to find that from the general fund. from the city of Chico to pay those fees.
But in a mobile home park where you don't have a foundation?
No.
You're on blocks.
No, the
She's talking about.
Simplicity
No, we're
Village.
talking about blocks, yes.
Yeah, but on blocks, if it's not if you don't have a foundation, not a permanent residence.
She's referring to Simplicity Village type model.
Right.
Which does, I mean, they're talking about having eventually a sewer hookup and the rest of it. But that-
For the community center, yes.
Correct. No, I thought
No.
on each one of the.
No.
Community
No.
center. I'm saying
And
that.
it would take overturning the regulations with the city, which is one of the larger, the city does not currently allow that type of development.
Okay.
Thank you.
Again, I'm speaking on behalf of the city, this is not my opinion
The city does
on.
not currently allow.
Correct.
But it is the cheapest, fastest way to house the most number of people.
And it would take a movement of the policy-making body, which is the
Yep.
city council.
Well,
Okay.
you know, you can also convert storage facilities into, or at
Yep.
least sections of them into SRO style shelter. You could take industrial space that's sitting empty and convert that into camps. There's lots of ways to make affordable
Yep.
housing if there's a political will.
Yes.
And if there's not opposition from developers who don't necessarily, and landlords who don't want downward pressure on rents.
You know, what your point alludes to a point I wanted to make earlier. The best time to stretch your dollar and make a big impact with the limited funds we've got for affordable housing is in a recession. You know, right now, there is no vacant industrial space. In the recession, you were 25% vacant. There was finished lots selling for $25,000. A finished lot now is going to be $125,000 to $140,000.
Now, did the mall there there must have been incentives from the state and the city in order to build that place, and we got stores going empty now. We've got all these store or malls like this that have empty spots in them. Why not use units there for micro shelters where people are charged with reducing the amount of bikes that are stolen in that shopping mall?
So I think, I believe that the answer to getting any of those things achieved would be that the city would first have to pass a declaration of shelter crisis,
Yes.
which allows them to bypass all the
Yes.
building laws so that they
Well,
can do this.
I mean, there's a lot of things in the Title 19 that can be changed and that, are reviewed periodically about what is allowed and what's not allowed. If we want to get serious about not having homelessness get worse, these tax cuts and service cuts are going to make things worse very soon. We're going to see a lot more homeless people.
Yes.
And so what are we going to do?
Yes.
The city of Chico at present is forecast to be going in the red inside of 5 years with forecasted pension costs. That's just the pension cost forecast.
And so
The county of Butte is forecast to go in the red $1.5 million in a year and a half to 2 years.
Wow. So, speaking of the county of Butte, I hope it's not uncomfortable. I'd like to introduce our supervisor, Larry Wall, who's here. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. And I have a question directed to it says, do the Butte County Board of Supervisors have a role in providing affordable housing in Chico? So do the county supervisors have a role in Chico? If so, what is it? Would you like to answer that, Larry, or would you like to have somebody else help you?
No, I'll take a stab at it. Actually, we do, but we need to know what you want from us. You can't just ask an open-ended question and say, what can you do for us? It doesn't work that way. It's like any place else. You go to the city, you have to know what you want to ask for and see what the feasibility works out to be.
You want county land in the shelter crisis.
Yeah.
Yes,
If I can compliment Supervisor Wall's answer, I would say that the county actually has taken a very significant step. Under state law, a county or a city can create a housing authority. Back in 1946, the County Board of Supervisors decided to create a housing authority to directly address the housing needs of Butte County. That's why we exist. So the board, and we've had a very good relationship with the county ever since. So you can thank the Board of Supervisors for the existence of the Housing Authority, and we do business under contract throughout the county and with every jurisdiction in the county. So we work with the City of Chico under contract, and we have Development Authority and Operational Authority in the City of Chico. Same thing in Oroville, same thing in Gridley, Biggs, and Paradise. So we are very grateful for the Board of Supervisors.
But I would add that the city of Chico is the law of the land. So if you're anything in the city of Chico, it supersedes county land use authority, building authority.
Sure.
So,
But Chico's always been referred to as sort of a jigsaw puzzle of parts of county and parts of city, so there are definitely parts of the county that could be addressed.
yeah.
So I have a question for Bob Trouch. Have you guys looked at SROs, and is there any potential for that, especially for workforce housing?
We are talking to the planning department, and ultimately we will be talking about SROs, possibly going to the city to talk about that. But right now, our main focus has been Simplicity Village, which could be considered SROs, single occupancy bedrooms for the community. So that would fall under the SRO category.
I think there's possible economic viability for multifamily to do SROs for workforce housing. And I think if you start cutting down on the number of bathrooms and all of the complexity of that, the city starts to have the possibility of a justification to cut back on the fees, because that's really the cost. I think
they can be as small, if I'm not wrong, as 170 square feet, those structures can be, and it would still fall under an SRO for the city.
I think that has potential. And I think there's still doing SROs in San Francisco.
Right.
For the benefits of people who don't know what an SRO is.
Single residency occupancy. So it's one unit for one person. It used to be, you had hotels that were all SROs, where people would go, single men, single women, families, they'd have many times, somebody would run it, they'd do all the cooking for everyone in the units. So we need some more of those at this point, because a lot of people on the street would be very, very happy to be in an SRO.
How many
is converting SROs to hotel rooms.
How many did we used to have?
There was over 4,000 SROs in downtown Chico one time.
Thank you.
Mike knows a lot about that.
4,000. Just go back and look at history books and look at our pictures and look at all the old hotels, like Hotel Oaks, I think was 5 floors, and those were all single room occupancy hotel rooms. People lived there. They took the electric train up and down Esplanade. They didn't use cars. They lived there, and they took their meals usually in the same building as part of their rent. And that was standard all up and down, all over the country, actually.
Are there any left now?
San Francisco.
I don't think there may be a few left. I keep hearing about them. I mean to investigate it, but I haven't. But that's a true story.
For them.
Not many.
Okay, new question. Taking into consideration that SSI recipients receive $750 a month, what types of housing are we considering is the question. I think what types of housing are available to them, and what type can we use to address people that are living on $750 a month?
There isn't anything available for anyone, and I think that figure is actually 750 to about 920, depending on the particular person. So the people in our homes, on average, probably average about $900 a month. Unless they're on Social Security, some of them get $1,100, $1,200 a month. There isn't anything. First of all, you have first, last security, 3 times income. So there isn't anything available for the people in the street at this point. When we put people inside, we figure out the costs for everything, for electric, for gas, for TV, internet, everything, and our average costs for that person, and then we help with food, are about $400 to $450 a month, which leaves someone about half their salary yet. So we're taking about 50% of their salary, but they have about half their salary left to do the things that normal people do. Maybe go to a movie, go out to eat, do whatever they can do. So that's how we've worked out the income portion.
What's a tiny house?
Tiny house would be, depending on how we build them, $150 to $175 a month would be the cost to have a tiny house. It would actually be affordable and also pay for itself. Now, upfront funding, we'd be looking at raising money. We've already raised quite a bit of money, actually, for upfront costs to bring in sewer, bring in electric, bring in water, all of the things we'd have to do for the community center. And then the people would be able to spend let's say $150 to $200 a month of their income would go for that unit, for that bedroom. The rest of the money would be for them to do other things. And we have, again, what we're talking about is actually surrounding them with activities to reintegrate them into society. It's really, when you live on the street, you live there for, what, a day and a half, 2 days?
2 days.
How hard it is to live on the street. We talk about people being on drugs in the street. I think if I lived on the street, I'd be taking drugs. It'd be so horrible living on the street. So I think that when we get these people inside, we have houses that start out wet. Our houses don't always start out dry. But before long, people are saying, we want this house to be dry. We want to have other things happen in our community. So we're creating community and family in each one of those houses. And Simplicity Village, the way we're designing it is actually as family. We just recently had 65 people that we had in our houses, all for a family dinner, 65 people. It was an amazing, wonderful event because they feel like family. They care about each other. We've had some people pass in our houses in the last 5 years. They celebrate these people, so it actually becomes family. We're reintegrating people back into society that they've lost contact with.
Is there an alliance between like workforce development?
Pardon?
Is there an alliance between workforce development? So you've got a group
Job
of people,
training.
Job training. With Simplicity Village, we have a design for doing that. We have actually people lined up for several areas of construction, repair of furniture. We actually, if we're going out, we're actually looking for a warehouse right now because we're getting furniture in and other items in where we can actually train people to repair, fix furniture, sell it on the internet. So we're looking at all those programs, yes.
Good job.
Okay, last of the questions, and then we'll wrap it up. This has to do with off-campus student housing. What sort of impact does it have on the overall market? And I would broaden that to ask, are there ways that the university can be part of the solution?
I'll take a first shot at that. I used to work in the university housing department, so I have some context here. The university has a policy of housing its freshmen. All upperclassmen are dispersed to the community. Most student housing is along the Nord Corridor, what's affectionately known as Cockroach Alley, in the community.
The Red Cup District.
There you go. Very good. And most student housing is operated by property managers who specialize in student housing. A great amount of the student housing that is built is uniquely built for students, 4 and 5 bedroom units, bedrooms surrounding a common area and kitchen. Each room rented out to a student or two whose parents co-sign on the lease. The lease is all being joint and severally liable, so it's a very specialized business. We do see this as the university, when the university upticks in growth, it does impact the Chico market. But in general, you're really, for the most part, talking two separate markets. There's a student housing market in this community, and then there's a market rate housing market. And for the most part, they're different and served by different sets of landlords, and there are different specialties in those two markets.
Can I add to that? I work on Nord. I work for a property management company, but we also have places on 5th Street. So we've got a lot of units that we're dealing with. And like you said, some of them are designed to be dorm style, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, small kitchen, so that it's almost like the upgrade of a dorm. You leave the dorms and then you go to this place. The rents keep going up. In the 5 years I've been there, they're just ticking up and ticking up, and I see people more and more. Like, we used to have people that could work part-time at Safeway and live there. Now, they're all coming from San Diego and the Bay Area. Parents are paying the rent. In some ways, it's made a big change in that they're not drinking near as much. They're smoking a lot more. And it's a mellower place, but... But now, all of a sudden, there's these huge places going up on Nord, 4 stories, and they're wanting, they're offering maid service. They're really trying to get this really high income off these brand new places.
Wait a minute, that sign said affordable housing.
Yeah.
I didn't say
Yeah.
who.
$1,000 a
It's a
bedroom.
relative.
Yeah,
You telling me?
there's a place that went in between two of ours where Warren's drive-thru used to be. And I talked to the guy and I said, you know, what you need to put in is 1-bedrooms, studios. This is what's gonna rent really fast. He said, I can't do it, it doesn't pencil out, and he put in 3 bedrooms and he's still half vacant. So, I don't know what the solution is, but I think building these giant places that are trying for the highest rents, I don't think they're gonna rent out, from what I've seen. Our older units that are not fixed up are renting out every year. We have 100% occupancy. When we tried to upgrade some of them with granite countertop, we can't rent them. So,
I would comment a little bit on that market. I have a property on North Avenue, and I don't have any cockroach problems. But
we don't either,
I would say that the prices that these properties are selling for are breathtaking. Okay, 18 units sold on Nord, brand new construction, for about $5 million. Okay, and they were just completed, just sold. They sold 400 units very recently. That was the Timbers.
that's our work.
Okay, well, Timbers sold at like $51 million. Okay, so you're talking $125,000 a unit for a lot of those units are pretty old. So that's kind of setting the bar on values. The market right now is at about a 5. Well, in Chico today, you could probably sell well-placed units at about a 5% capitalization rate, which is breathtakingly expensive. That's the market, and the overall market in Chico is about a 5.7% cap rate. That's kind of a given. So the student properties are even more valuable at the present time. So it's the costs of acquisition are so high that the rents are necessarily going way up for everybody, even for your properties as well. So that. And all of the multifamily properties in Chico are similarly impacted because there's been a lot of sales in the last couple of years. That's raised the baseline. Those landlords have massive loans, and the rents have to make sense. And that's why you're not getting deals right now, right? You're in a position where the cost of construction is so high, it's kind of a vicious cycle. And I think Bill alluded to that as well.
Well, yeah, and the AMLI student housing project, that was $350,000 a unit to build that project. So you're looking at $56 million for a student housing project, and it's because of the rents they can get.
And that goes back to the whole problem you were talking about. We need for the students as well, studio and 1-bedrooms, or SROs, because the reality in this community, 1 out of 6 students right now are food insecure, housing insecure. I can go, statistics are horrible. So what we're doing is building these mansions for kids to come here from other areas that may have the money, but we're hurting all of the kids that are living in this area because they can't afford to even eat at this point.
Jim, did you have a question or comment? Okay. I'm gonna wrap it up. I wanted to say, the reason that I wanted to put this on is to get some ideas, not just for me, but for all of us, that people can wrap their heads around a little bit. And I actually took away, I know some people were writing notes, I actually took away quite a few things that are part of the solution. There's not one great big solution, but there are a lot of little pieces. So I have down accessory dwelling units, reducing impact fees or deferring fees, local subsidies, communal housing, smaller houses, changes to Prop 13, a bond to offset impact fees, property tax increase, vertical development, and SROs. Infill is all part of, keeping us in town rather than growing out beyond the margins.
And
So
reduced fees for infill.
Reduced fees.
Definitely.
The city's going to be coming up with a study.
There's another one.
Yeah.
The city's going to be coming up with a study, should be out next month or so, even the next couple of weeks. But the purpose of the study is to look at available land, get real about how deliverable that land is through the build-out of our general plan, and also look at policies that can help maintain a balanced supply and demand market aimed at affordability. It's a really important study. I'm thankful that council authorized it. It should be out from the planning department in a matter of weeks.
We'll look forward to that. So,
You didn't mention the city's declaration of a housing emergency as
yeah,
well.
I brought it up earlier in regards to that's the only way that we're going to be able to get around the rules that would allow
You
for a
just didn't
simplicity
mention
village.
it, so I was making sure you hadn't lost track of it.
I was actually thinking the same thing. I'm glad she said that.
Okay.
I'm
I
also
didn't-
just one person, and I do sign off on just about every solution on that list. I don't think a single one of them is feasible if we leave off how we have conversations and how many people are participating in them.
Well, this is how we have conversations.
Well, this is, 50, this is how 50 people have conversations.
Yeah.
So unless this continues to spread, I don't think we'll get any traction on any of this.
Agreed.
I also think we really have to look at Prop 13. You discussed a little bit of it, but when you look at Prop 13, everyone should go on Prop 13 and see what happens to corporations who own land and that they're not paying their fair share. If you look at how they design Prop 13, houses that sell, people move, they get bigger, they get smaller, they sell their homes, taxes go up for them. Corporations don't move. Instead of selling that property, they change the name of it, but they don't sell it. And so corporations, I think the figure is something like they're down to 13% of the tax base when they used to be at 70%. We have to change Prop 13. That will make a dramatic difference in the amount of money coming into this state.
That's exactly the way our downtown was.
That's right.
So,
The community land trust as well, I just want to say, as far back as 2008, the city recognized the second priority they had behind a housing trust, which they now have accomplished, was a community land trust, which is used to create housing that remains affordable forever. So Ed has offered to be the president of our startup board.
Way to go, Dan.
So kudos to everyone here tonight for being part of the solution. Stay tuned for what the next community meeting is.
I want to thank all of you. Thanks, and I hope we have more meetings like this.